Welcome to People, Places, Planet Pod, the official podcast of the Environmental Law Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to ensure a healthy environment, prosperous economies, and vibrant communities founded on the rule of law.
Welcome to Conversation with Environmental Disruptors. Today we are chatting with Kaitlin Urso, Cannabis Environmental Consultant in Colorado's Small Business Assistance Program. As a rare treat for us, we're actually in Denver for the Sustainable Cannabis Symposium, so we're all recording this all together in one room. Kaitlin, it is so great to meet you. Thank you for taking the time to host us. I think it's safe for me to say that the sustainable cannabis field is super new to me, so I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to a real-life cannabis sustainability expert. To kick us off, I'd love to learn more about what you do. What does a typical day look like for you?
Typically, how my job works is half of my time is spent responding to requests for assistance, so people just calling me up and asking for helps from anything from how do I get a permit to I just started a new business, can you come do a site visit and help me understand my environmental impacts, assess what compliance and permitting needs I have, and then also make recommendations on environmental reductions as well, so business practices that can help reduce their footprint. Then the other half of my time is spent working on proactive environmental projects for industries of focus. And so typically we rotate our industry of focus on an annual basis, but it also kind of depends on the needs of that industry. So for instance, last year we worked with the craft brewing industry in Colorado for all of 2017 to help them focus on reducing their environmental impacts for energy, air, water, and waste. That brings us to this year of focusing on the cannabis industry. And for both breweries and for the cannabis industry, from my program's perspective of why we chose them, both were kind of typical more what we would call area sources, in that on an individual basis, these smaller businesses weren't triggering our environmental compliance thresholds. So like for instance, they're not triggering our air permitting thresholds, or they don't have to get stormwater permit, or some, they're just smaller impacts that don't meet our thresholds. But when you have so many of them co-located in an area, it kind of gives an accumulative effect. Especially with my program being focused on small businesses, we really try to step in and say, hey, even though you don't trigger our compliance thresholds for having to meet regulations and make reductions, there's many things you can do on a voluntary basis to reduce your kind of cumulative impacts as an industry. And so my program is kind of focused on, those sort of like the left behind smaller businesses, and how do we get voluntary reductions from them. So it just kind of has been a unique fit that I have fallen into becoming an environmental consultant for the cannabis industry.
Kaitlin has been in her role for 5 years, and as she mentioned, she's helped many industries tackle sustainability, in the past craft brewing, and now cannabis. Energy and water consumption is especially relevant to indoor cultivation, which is highly prevalent in Colorado.
Here in Colorado, our regulatory structure forced a lot of cannabis cultivation, especially marijuana, indoors. Therefore, the energy load from growing indoors, you've got the lights, you've got the HVAC systems, those are the highest energy loads there. Also, there's a lot of automation equipment in building management system for maintaining thresholds for temperature and humidity. There's a lot of pumps for automated irrigation and drip systems and things like that. It uses, when grown indoors, it uses municipal water for crops. So water that has been treated to drinking water standards, that's being used for kind of an agricultural purpose. And, we put a lot of energy and time into the treatment of our public drinking water system. And so, having that additional load that's really just going to water crops is an impact as well. Then the water coming off of the plants, they add a lot of nutrients to the water as they, to feed the plants as they grow indoors. And so the wastewater effluent can have a high nutrient load coming out. And so again, our municipal system is kind of cleaning up after industry by having to remove those nutrients.
Certain cannabis products like oils, waxes, vape cartridges, and edibles have shocking impacts. Extracting the THC, which is the main active ingredient of cannabis, to create these products uses industrial chemical solvents that contribute to air pollution. Air pollution is even a concern as the plant grows. Cannabis plants produce terpenes, a chemical considered a VOC, or volatile organic compound that poses threats to human and environmental health in large quantities.
So as the plants grow, they naturally emit terpenes, which is what people typically associate with the strong, offensive odor of marijuana. That odor is, it's news to industry that odor isn't just a nuisance, it's actually VOCs. Those terpenes are VOCs. And so those VOC emissions, when released into the atmosphere, they mix with nitrogen oxide emissions, which are combustion emissions, cars, power plants, those types of things, and the presence of sunlight, which in Colorado we have like 300 days of sunlight, to form ground level ozone.
Regulation will play a big role in addressing environmental challenges in this industry. In Colorado, there is an approved pesticides list and required pesticide residual monitoring, though there is still uncertainty as some new information and issues emerge. In other contexts, regulations are actually preventing sustainability in this industry.
There's a lot of packaging waste associated with the industry because of the kind of safe packaging requirements that have the best of intentions on the public health side, but then kind of having this inadvertent environmental impact. So, to keep it safe from children, and I think there's some standards about like it can't be see-through, so you can't see what the product is inside of it. There's some transport regulations that the industry tries to meet. So, for instance, if you were a customer and you were going to go buy, let's say, a single joint from a dispensary, you go in, you purchase the joint. They don't just hand you, a marijuana joint and you walk out the door and you're on your way. They package it in a plastic tube. Well, then that plastic tube needs to be put into a child-proof bag, and that bag has to be like black plastic so you can't see through it. Well, then in order for the customer to be able to transport it home and prove that that's not an open container, like open consumption in their vehicle, they then put it in a paper bag and staple it shut so that, if you got pulled over on the way home, you can show it's a sealed product, it's stapled shut in this plastic bag. So by the time you get home as an end consumer to consume this product, you've got a plastic tube that's non-recyclable. You've got another child-proof bag that's non-recyclable. And then you also have this paper bag on the outside that may or may not be recyclable depending on, what kind of bag it is. And so you've just got all this packaging waste for maybe what's, a tiny little bit of plant material and some paper. There's also a lot of plant waste from marijuana, as you can imagine, and so that a lot of that is being either composted or landfilled at the moment. The problem with that is to meet DEA requirements for kind of avoiding diversion, from people ending up in the wrong hands, they have to mix that plant waste with 50% non-marijuana waste, so that's no longer usable and recognizable. So when you're composting, it almost kind of takes away from a little bit of the environmentalism of composting when you have to double the amount of material you're composting every time you go to compost, or when you go to put it in landfill, you have to double the amount of material you put in landfill before it can go in the landfill.
Gathering data on these environmental impacts is a crucial next step for the cannabis industry. Kaitlin's sustainability strategy for cannabis tackles this, even borrowing lessons learned from her time in consulting in craft brewing.
As far as being able to, you mentioned getting, some statistics or, aggregated data on the impacts, there's not a lot out there right now on that and quantifying industry impacts. And it's kind of really hard to go about it too, because like energy, for instance, a lot of these indoor grows are in warehouse districts where you've got multiple businesses on the same meter, and so it's hard for them to even say how much energy do I use because I don't have my own unique meter. Same thing with water. There's also not a lot of reporting infrastructure for the industry yet, and so that's another project that CDPHE is working on, and me in particular, is trying to help industry and work with them collaboratively to sort of build up a robust reporting tool. So picture an online website where any cultivation could go sign up for a profile, and then they could report their monthly energy bill, their water bill, how much solvents they use, how much nutrients they use, to really characterize their own individual environmental impacts. Then they can see trends over time. We can give them tools to calculate return on investment. So, if they installed LED lights that reduce their energy consumption by X amount, we expect it to be paid off in Y number of years. So we're trying to help build them up those tools, and then this tool that we're trying to build too will also be able to anonymously compare metrics to other businesses. So you'll have one page where you've got just your environmental metrics and how it changes over time, and then a second page where basically you just turn into an anonymous dot on a scatter plot for every metric. So you can see energy production on the y-axis, and then along the x-axis cannabis production, and everyone that's reported is just an individual dot. So you can say, I know I'm this dot, how do I compare energy usage to peers of similar production size? How does my usage compare to my peers, to help really drive that competitive environmental change. Then we can also provide people with metrics of, are you in the top 25%? Are you in the bottom 25%? So we are working very hard to hopefully get that project up off the ground. That project was actually modeled after the National Brewers Association has a benchmarking tool that's very similar for brewers across the country, where they can report their brewing metrics and anonymously compare it to their peers. So just sort of be competitive on their own accord, and be like, okay, and really decide, how do I want to focus my dollars that I'm going to invest in becoming more sustainable? If I look at how I compare to industry folks across the industry, and if I'm already, in the top 25% for energy, maybe I should focus on a water project. If I see, I'm bottom 25 for water usage, instead of installing LED lights first, I should maybe think about an irrigation drip system. So just kind of help people focus on what's most important to them.
Wow, that's really cool, especially the lessons learned from the craft brewing industry. I'm curious, with the benchmarking tool, could you talk about why it's anonymous? I can see some could argue that maybe it would drive even more competition if people knew exactly who was performing low and who was performing high.
Yeah, so the decision to make it anonymous data sharing was really a lesson learned that we learned from the Brewers Association, in that people are very, they're very tight-knit about their data. About their profit margins, about their business process in both craft brewing and, I'd say marijuana cultivation as well, because what really in those industries, what's really driving a customer to one company versus another is just sort of subtle small differences. Like the brewing process is overall the same for everyone. It's just, what makes a good brewery is just these small little tight differences. What makes a good, good marijuana grower versus, poor marijuana is just, the attention to details and these slight operational changes. And so in both industry, they really hold those tiny differences as that's their bread and butter, that's their secret sauce. And so through revealing your metrics, there's a potential to kind of reveal some proprietary methodology. And folks too never want to be, it's one thing to be celebrated as environmentally friendly. It's another thing to find out, gosh, I'm bottom 25%. That's really not good for my brand. And so, making it anonymous doesn't put that stress of the business on having to decide before they share their metrics, if they want to or not, because really they share their metrics and then they find out where they stand. The tool is meant to be positive and uplifting, and that it should be a motivation for those businesses to say, okay, what can I do to improve? There's a lot more heightened sensitivity from the marijuana industry with sharing their data versus the craft brewing industry. Mostly, I think my impression is that it's kind of surrounded around still the legality of the gray area of it. Like, it's federally illegal, but legal at the state level. And people are just a lot more apprehensive about sharing so much about their system and things like that because of those, the gray area on legality. And so we just want to make sure that, data security is a little bit more heightened for marijuana industry versus craft brewing for those reasons. Because industry doesn't want to, open up the doors to government to come in, to do a study, to make quantifiable assertions about their industry, to then go and create regulations to regulate them. And so that's kind of been this hurdle that we've had to overcome. When you take the time to do that courtship with industry and really build up a trusting relationship with them and show them that you're an asset and that you want to work with them, you catch more, flies with honey kind of thing. Like people are willing to go not only to come into compliance, but ask for resource on how to go above and beyond. And so we're really finding that, the typical approach of always going down the regulatory route of kind of the first response, knee-jerk reaction to a new environmental impact, we're finding that's not necessarily the best way, that we can actually get more reductions from industry if we just sort of educate them and show them what they can do on their own instead of just jumping straight towards the regulatory route and fighting with them every step of the way.
Needless to say, your work shows that government assistance is supporting the sustainability in business. From your experience in craft brewing and now cannabis, what other factors are driving sustainability in these sectors?
Again, I think that it's just the culture of the industries and, really just wanting to become more sustainable. And I think, just the time that we are in history where we've got, the most people we ever have on the planet and the least resources we've ever had on the planet at the same time. And so I think that it's coming to the forefront of recognition of people's minds that, maybe the way we did things in like 50s and 60s maybe aren't sustainable into the future. And so how do we, modify the way that we do things to make sure that we can continue to, sustain ourselves on this planet? The craft brewing industry and both cannabis industry are very aware that they're resource-intensive industries, and they want to be able to continue to do business into the future. And so they're always looking at ways to kind of improve. Like the brewing industry is very aware of water scarcity and that it's going to kind of get worse in the future. And so, everything from how they do the farming of hops and the amount of water that goes into that to how they package their beer, it all kind of impacts their business's longevity into the future. And if they can't sort of meet these requirements, they're not even requirements, but kind of self-mandated initiatives, they realize that, maybe we won't be as successful in the future unless we start doing these things now. Again, with that kind of, sort of awareness, I think there's a lot more consumers too that are, like I said before, putting buying power behind their dollar and kind of looking at, there's many craft brews out there that I could choose from, and there's many delicious beers I could choose from. But when it comes down to, me spending $7, $8, $9 for a glass of beer at a tap house, I'm going to put my dollars behind somebody that's really thinking about how they're making that product, and are they being efficient, and are they doing things to give back to their community and engage with their community? Are they taking on corporate social responsibility projects that kind of take them above and beyond? And also the profit margins are becoming tight, and especially in cannabis in Colorado, they're kind of calling it a race to the bottom right now. Wholesale prices are just, dropping intensely because competition is so high. And so how do you maintain a good product but still be able to compete in that market? You've got to take on sustainability. You've got to take on resource efficiency. But yeah, so I think that there's just a lot of things that kind of create this perfect storm for it's time to be sustainable. It's time to be environmentally friendly, and there's dollar values associated with it. We are very careful about not revealing any confidential business information about proprietary processes, but we always kind of tell people, when it comes to environmental processes, we all share this planet and we're all sharing these resources and we all go outside and breathe the same air. So really, we should all be on the same page with environmental aspects. And we tell industry, you can compete on products, you can compete on margins, you can compete in a number of different ways. But what should bring you together is environmental outreach and education and improvements. And the businesses we've worked with have kind of really taken that to heart and said, okay, yeah, we will figure out a way that when it comes to environmental, we're going to collaboratively work together. I think that, we all recognize that there's value in that and let's share it. Especially small businesses versus large businesses. It's a little bit more achievable when we're talking in the realm of small businesses. They're a little bit more open to lifting each other up and sharing, secrets that aren't actually secrets. I mean, they're tied to profit margins, but again, we're all should be working together on environmental impacts.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for talking to us for so long. I think it's especially valuable to talk to you right before the cannabis conference tomorrow, or the symposium tomorrow. Yes, I feel like I'm pretty new to the industry. I didn't know a lot of things that we've talked about today.
Yeah, you guys will learn a lot.
Thank you for tuning in to People, Places, Planet Pod, brought to you by the Environmental Law Institute. We would like to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and ideas to podcast@eli.org. And if you're interested in learning more about our work, attending one of our events, reading our publications, or becoming a member, please visit our website at www.eli.org.